got to take this guy on the road with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Rebecca, thank you. Rebecca, thank you very much. Folks, well, thanks for being here. Only in New Hampshire, huh? My Lord, what a great crowd. It's good to be back in Exeter, and I mean that sincerely. I really like this state. You know, you have a responsibility that you take very, very seriously. It isn't just, you know, when you're back in my home state of Delaware, or I'm out in California, or down in Florida, or up in Michigan, people say, well, why is it that the first primaries in the state that, in fact, doesn't have a lot of... Michael, how you feeling, pal? Good to see you, buddy. Nice to see you. I say it's simple. It's the only state, primary state, that you take on a responsibility that goes beyond what you want for your state. Think about it. You make the determination who of us gets to get by. You know, if you've ever played Monopoly, gets to be able to play the rest of the game, because you determine and you narrow the field and you do it with responsibility. But it's interesting, in all the years I come up campaigning for other people as well as for myself here, I find that you look out and you look about your responsibility as what the rest of the nation is going to have available to them. Not every state looks at it that way. They look at what's best for my state. Obviously, you care about what happens in your state, but it's interesting to me that you decide who you're going to let through the gate based on who you think can win, who you think can represent the values that the whole party stands for. Well, thank you. No, but I really mean it. I really mean it. That's what's so special about this place. Think about it. I doubt whether in many other primary states they say, okay, I'm going to vote for so-and-so, but I tell you what, I got to figure out whether that person can win in North Carolina, or that person can win in Florida, or that person wins in Pennsylvania, or the states we have to win in order to be able to govern, whomever the president is. So I thank you for that. I thank you for taking it seriously. And secondly, look, there's a lot of issues, and the mayor pointed out a bunch of them, but that we could talk about today. Dana's talked about, you know, we could spend the whole day talking about climate change, which I think is the existential threat to the world and to the nation, about education and our failure to invest in our children, both in preschool as well as post-high school. We could talk about immigration and how we're being embarrassed around the world by showing ourselves to be something we're not, the way we deal with immigrants and the way we deal with children being snatched from their families and their mother's arms, the way we insist. My wife just went across the border into from Brownsville, Texas, into the area where the people seeking asylum for the first time in American history, Joe, are having to do it from abroad. They cannot come to the United States to seek asylum. We've never done that before, and they're living in squalor. Thousands of people across the border. We could talk about the need to deal with the women's issues, from violence against women to the right of a woman to choose, and all those issues that relate to it. And so many more things. But I want to get to your questions. But before I do, I want to speak to one issue and then talk to any and all of those issues you'd like to raise with me. And I'll try to answer them as succinctly and as quickly and directly as I can, because you're entitled, you're a group of people who want to know what each of us stand for and what we'll attempt to do and what you think we can do. Folks, from the time I announced my candidacy, which was a little late in the game compared to others, from the time I announced my candidacy, I've talked about the need to unify America, to unify the country. I'm running against or with a number of very competent people for the Democratic nomination, a lot of good people. And I find it fascinating. They talk about he's an old guy, but boy, he's naive. I didn't think age and naivete went together. But because Biden doesn't understand this new Republican Party. Granted, Biden was able to get an awful lot of things done because, hey, Mary Carey, how are you? Get an awful lot of things done. He's been able to pull people together, but everything's changed. Can't do that anymore. Can't do that anymore. We're a divided nation. I refuse to accept the proposition that we'll be in a state of perpetual war with Republicans because you can't govern the country if that's the case. We are a democracy, and our democracy depends upon consensus. We have to be able to pull the country together. And I believe but I really mean it. Think about it. Think of how many of my fellow travelers in the Democratic nomination process think you can't do that. They say it's naive to be able to do that. Well, I'm telling you, I know how to do it, and we can do it. We must do it. There's no alternative, because America is unique in all the world. We're an idea. America was founded on an idea, both in the Declaration and in the Constitution. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, it's about union. It's the United States of America. It's not the Democrats of America and the Republicans of America. It sounds corny, but think about it. There's no way to be able to govern unless we can arrive at a consensus. And they say, well, Joe, you don't understand this new Republican Party. I think I understand it better than anybody. I've been on the short end of that new Republican Party more than anybody else in politics. No. The president spent over 10, 12, 14 million, I don't know how many dollars it's been, running negative ads about me. Going after my surviving son, telling lies about him. Making me the object of things that are totally fabricated. Even Facebook has taken down the ads that are being run by, and the bots being run by Vladimir Putin about Joe Biden. I've learned three things lately. Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president because he knows I know him, and I know him well. Number two, Kim Jong-un of North Korea doesn't want me to be president. By the way, do you see what he said? The official news agency. You can smile, I'm okay. But all kidding aside, he said, the official news agency in North Korea said, I don't know, about 2 weeks now, 10 days, 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden is a rabid dog and should be beaten to death with a stick. That's the quote. Well, and then he got a love letter from Trump. And the other thing, have you ever seen a time and that you've been involved in politics or involved in observing that a sitting president has spent so much time, money, and effort to try to pick a Democratic nominee? He doesn't want me to be the nominee. I wonder why. I wonder why. But folks, look, no matter what is said about me, this is not about me. It's about you. It's about the American people. And a president has to not only be willing to fight, but has to be willing to unite. A president has to be willing to stand back. Because it's not. This election is not about me, it's about the American people and the state of affairs we find ourselves in. And so there's much to talk about. But when I announced my candidacy for the president, and I'll be very brief, as I said three things. One, I'm running first and foremost to restore the soul of America. I wrote an article after those folks came marching out of the fields down in Charlottesville carrying torches. Close your eyes and remember what you saw on television. Their veins bulging, carrying torches coming out of a field, shouting the same anti-Semitic bile that was shouted in the streets of Germany in the 30s. Literally the same. Carrying swastikas, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists. And a young woman was killed. And what did the president say? The press asked him, what is it? What do you think, Mr. President? And he said the following. He said, there are very fine people on both sides. No president in American history has ever said anything like that. That's not a joke. The closest anyone could come was Andrew Jackson before the Civil War. Nobody's done that. Shocked the conscience of America and stunned the world. We have to restore the soul of America. As you said, boss, Mr. Mayor, we the people, we hold these truths to be self-evident. We've never lived up to it completely. But every generation has opened the aperture wider and wider and wider to include more people. This guy's thrown it away. Not a joke. Not a joke. Second reason I'm running, I know everybody calls me middle-class Joe because I'm always talking about the middle class. From the time I ran, that's my background. We weren't poor. I was raised in a 3-bedroom split-level home with 4 kids and a grandpa and my mom and dad. We thought we were just fine. It was a safe, decent neighborhood. But I guess technically it was lower or middle class. But the fact is, middle class is getting really nailed right now. We're no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world. We had been for the last, 80 years, 70 years. You have a majority of middle class people thinking that, in fact, their children will not have the same standard of living they had. That hadn't happened in the lifetime of anybody in this room. And so much more. And I said the third reason I was running is to unify the country. That's why I got involved. Because without unity, we've got an awful problem. Our democracy is literally at risk. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think it's literally at risk. So with that, as my mom were here, God love her, Catherine Eugenia Finnegan Biden, she said, Joey, hush up and let them ask questions. So let me open this to questions on anything you want to talk about, okay? Questions? Yes, ma'am.
How do you deal with a NATO ally who seems to be playing both sides against the other?
Firmly. I've spent a lot of time with Erdogan. I probably have spent more time face-to-face with him than virtually anybody in the past 8 years. Because I was asked by President Obama to try to deal with and work out relationships with Turkey, a NATO ally who is now inviting in the Russians to put a missile defense system up, and so on. What we have to do is we have to always, no matter whether you're an ally or not, we have to speak out when human rights are being violated or when a leader of a country is acting like an oligarch. And the fact is, we should be making it clear, as we did in our administration with Erdogan. You either are going to, in fact, play the game like it's supposed to be played in the deal that's been made in terms of NATO, or we're going to start to speak out. And remember, in Istanbul, the opposition party gained significantly when, in fact, after he won this last time. Okay, we should have, as they say in Southern Delaware, an altar call with Mr. Erdogan, which I've had before. We'd have it again. And look what happened. I don't know what deal the president made with him, but we abandoned an ally, and I've spent as much time with the Kurds as anybody at all because I was the guy who first went into Kurdistan and the northern part of Iraq and met with Barzani and the entire community there. Tried to put together an agreement, which we did get put together, to provide for general elections in Turkey, where in fact they could participate in a way that was appropriate, etc. And what happened? We had a small contingent of special forces working with a group of, quote, Arabs, but they were Kurds as well as friendly folks in the Arab community that we put together to take on ISIS, the terrorist group, to break up the so-called caliphate. They were establishing what they call the caliphate, and they were doing it in Syria and in trying to go into eastern Iraq. And we put together a small group of special forces, trained and worked with over 11,000 Kurds in this coalition we had. And by the way, 10,000 Kurds died in the fighting, okay? They died. We lost 10,000 Kurds, gave their life defeating, beating back, and ending the caliphate. And what happened? When, in fact, the president made some deal with Erdogan, who is using the Kurds as a rationale to divide his country, like Trump is using white supremacy to divide our country, what happened? We pulled out. And you saw the filming. You think of what you saw on TV. You saw our armored personnel carriers coming out with our brave soldiers, mostly special forces, not able to look at the women holding up their children, saying, please, please don't leave us. They were ashamed. Our military is ashamed that they're ordered to leave. Our leading generals including one of the bravest guys I ever worked with. I've watched him when we went in and got bin Laden, who headed up the Navy SEALs, prompting him to write a scathing article, op-ed, about how this president has abandoned people. Why would people take our word any longer? We made a promise, and we left them out there. And so it gets down to a notion that we have to keep our word. And right now, the rest of the world's not so sure we mean it. I could go on, but I won't to get to other questions. But here's the deal. Look at what's happening in NATO writ large. If we have 4 more years of Donald Trump, I promise you there will be no NATO. There will be no NATO. And those of you who think, well, what difference does it make, Joe? Well, let me tell you. The reason why we have not been in another world war, NATO wasn't just set up to keep the Russians and, quote, the Soviet Union from overtaking Europe. It was set up so no one nation in Europe would be so powerful it would take over other nations and get us in a war like it's happened twice before. And it's starting to break down now. You see what's happening in Hungary with Erdogan, with Erdogan. You see what's happening in Turkey. You see what happens when the president comes up with an American first policy that puts America last. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Yes. And I'll go there. If anybody in the back, you get some of that.
Sorry. Taking into account your vast knowledge and experience, what do you tell the younger generation who say you're too old to be president?
Come run with me. No. No. Look, it's a legitimate question. I think it's totally legitimate to ask about one's age. I really do. I got asked the same question when I was not old enough to be elected senator. I was 29 years old. I got elected to the Senate before I was old enough to be sworn in. And they say, is he old enough to have the maturity to be able to do what he's saying he wants to do? So it's totally appropriate. That's why I've leased my detailed health care records. Thank God, as my mother would say, knock on wood, I'm in good health. I work out every morning. I'm in relatively good shape. At least I think I am. So. Well, okay, I thought, why, because of my age, why should they vote? Look, one of the reasons I decided to run for the president was because of my vast experience. You know, let me put it to you this way, particularly, well, not just younger voters and millennial voters, but everyone. With experience, hopefully comes some judgment, and hopefully comes some wisdom. And every election requires a slightly different set of skills that are most needed for what the next president should have. For example, if the perfect president would have 10 virtues, few of us have more than 5 of them. And what is most needed at the moment, at that moment in history, especially when you're at an inflection point in history, in the United States as well, but also internationally. I'd argue we're at an inflection point. The whole world is changing, and it's changing well beyond politics. We're in the midst of a 4th industrial revolution here. We're going to see the most difficult speech I ever had to make was to the World Economic Forum, to 800 leaders around the world. And they asked me to speak to the 4th industrial revolution. Will there be a middle class? Tough question. Look what's happened just in the last couple of years. Over 220,000 people have lost their jobs in retail. Average age 49 years of age, average salary $50,000 a year. Why'd they lose their jobs? Well, because of Amazon. They're not bad. I'm not saying they're bad technologically. But how many of you shopped online this year and didn't show up? Well, that's not a bad thing either. But guess what? All of a sudden, you got 220-some thousand people, mostly high school educated, able to live a middle-class life, who now have nothing. What do? What do they do now? And so the kinds of things that this president, next president, needs, in my view, is 2 things. A significant amount of experience to be able to get things done. First of all, you got to be able to beat Donald Trump. And I'm not being a wise guy. And whether you conclude I'm the one that fits this bill, I think that you'd acknowledge that there are at least 3 significant requirements this time that weren't necessarily necessary the last time or the time before. Everything changes. Number 1, who is most likely to be able to defeat Donald Trump? Because we know we can probably and will overcome 4 years of Donald Trump, taking a lot of work internationally and nationally. We'll be able to do that with a lot of work, but we cannot tolerate 8 years of him. It will fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a country. The second issue is it's not just enough to be able to beat Donald Trump. Who among us is the most likely to be able to get a Democratic Senate elected? Because you need to win back the Senate, for real. So, the question is, if you're a candidate running in North Carolina, who do you think among the Democratic candidates is most likely to be able to help you in North Carolina? It matters. At all those other inflection points, whether it was civil rights with Johnson or whether it was the New Deal with FDR, what happened? They brought along, when they got elected, people, large majorities in the House and in the Senate. Because you can't get anything done if we can't win that back. And whether it turns out to remain true, I'm the one who shows me beating Trump in North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, etc. So who among us is going to be able to not only get elected, but bring along other Democrats up and down the ladder, including in the Senate? I would argue the third thing that's going to be required is who among us is able to get anything done if they get elected. And I think you have to look at our records, whether or not we have passed big things in the United States Congress, the United States Senate, whether we're able to work with the other side, understand how it works, to be able to get consensus, to be able to generate significant change. And others can make their own case. Make my case, which I will not go into now, but I'm the guy that, remember, the president used to love turning to me and State of the Union and saying, Joe's going to do the following without telling me first. $900 billion Recovery Act. Sheriff Joe's going to handle it. They went on down the line. But so I've been able to, I know the system pretty well, and I've been able to get a lot done in the United States Congress. I passed more major legislation than everybody combined that's running. I think it matters. Doesn't mean they're not capable. It doesn't mean they're not capable. You have to make that judgment. Who among us do you think can implement what we say we want done? And the third thing I think is necessary is there's going to be no time for on-the-job training this time for international relations. The moment the President of the United States mounts that stage after being sworn in on January 21st, 2021, they better, when they mount that stage, know that the rest of the world knows who they are and knows that that president knows who they are and they know him or her. Because there's not a lot of chance for on-the-job training. And my experience, again, good or bad, I say to young people and older people, I've met every major world leader in the last 40 years. I know them. I've worked with them. I know the good guys. I know the bad guys. They know I know them, and they know me. And I think I'm ready from day one. That wasn't a requirement necessarily in other times at this moment. But folks, our alliances are literally in jeopardy. Our position in the world is really out of whack. You know, as my wife, the professor, would say, you can Google it, but take a look at what the international polling has shown. It shows that among leaders in the world, Xi Jinping is more respected than the President of the United States, and the President of the United States is just one click above the President of Russia. We got to change it. So I think they're the issues. We'll find out whether or not those particular characteristics I am particularly suited for or someone else's. That's for you to decide. But I think you'd all acknowledge that they are essential questions that have to be answered. So that's how I would deal with the question of whether or not my experience is good, bad, or indifferent. Let's get somebody in the back. And come on, you pick somebody out, whoever you like.
What is your message to independent voters that voted for Trump last time to get them to vote for you this time?
My message to independent voters and those 172,000 Democrats who switched over and voted for Trump is that I understand your problem. Here's the deal, folks. One of the things that happened, and it wasn't a bad thing, and I think there was a lot of sexism that helped defeat Hillary. I did 84 major events for Hillary Clinton. I went all over the country where nobody campaigned for her more than I did. But she would have been a great president. But what happened was I realized that when I came back after, I guess it was right after right after Labor Day during the electoral process, that think about this. There was a study done by the Shorenstein School at Harvard University that done between the time he got elected in November and before he was sworn in. And it asked the question, it did the research, of all the coverage of Hillary Clinton through the entire campaign, what portion of it was devoted to talking about issues? 4%. F-O-U-R. And everybody underestimated how pernicious Trump is. What did he talk about? Case in point. Remember, Martha Raddatz was the second person doing the interview for the questioner in the second debate? And it was right after Donald Trump had gone through that process of dealing with the Hollywood tape. I could grab women anywhere I want. You remember that whole scandal? And you knew what the first question Martha was going to ask. Going to ask him about that. He'd answer, and then they'd turn and ask Hillary. And I pled with everybody to say, stand up and don't answer the question. Stand up and say, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Let me tell you what I'm going to do for you, though. Hillary is a really bright, competent person. Would have been a good president. But think about this. Do you know the detail of any of her plans? My guess is you're an informed voter, and you probably don't unless you went online. Yeah, well, most people didn't because she never got a chance to talk about them. Didn't get a chance to talk about them. And so what happened? An awful lot of people that we traditional Democrats have gone out. What's our base been? Our base has been working class and middle class people. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of retail politics going on until for example, compare 2018, the off-year election. I went into 24 states for over 65, I think it was 69, but over 65 candidates. We won back 41 House seats, which I predicted we would. Not about my prediction, but I went, the whole issue was, my dad used to say, half of winning's showing up. And so what did we do? I went in all those red states, not as a candidate, but as a former vice president to campaign, and those purple states. And I'd say to anybody who wanted me in, I said, if you want me to come in and campaign for you, you got to be prepared. If we're riding down the road from one stop to another, if there's a diner, we're going to stop, and you're going to walk in, and we're going to say hi to everybody. Not a joke. Not a joke. Think how much talk there was about whether or not we're dealing with the problem of people who are losing their jobs. Look, guys, you all know it. There's a lot of people who have decent jobs right now, but they're afraid they're going to be gone. Think of are any of you truck drivers in here? Well, it's a gigantic profession. Talk to some of your friends who are truck drivers, professionals. Know what they're worried about? We think because they may not be they may not be college educated, not so smart. They're smarter than you because they listen to what everybody else listens. They know that within the next 4 to 10 years, they're going to be out of work. Why? Why? Because they're going to have automated trucking. We think they don't listen. Hear anybody talking about how we're going to take care of them? We stop talking to the concerns a lot of really hard-working people have. We talk about new technology. I go out to Silicon Valley and say, like, good, I'm tired of hearing what you're talking about automatic, you're going to provide a living wage like welfare to everybody. Most people I know that I grew up with, they don't want to be given anything. They want to work. They want a chance to work. My dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your child in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay. Think of all the people you grew up with where they think they can look at their child and say, it's going to be okay. So, folks, we got to start talking to them as we did in 18. Here's an answer. Here's how we do this. This is how you're displaced, but we're going to make sure you have a good paying job. Here's the way it works. But think about it. How much did we talk about that last time? And it wasn't Hillary's fault. It was because we played into this notion of responding to the ridiculous. The only place that Trump is comfortable is down in a mud pit. No, I mean, that's where he's comfortable fighting. Everybody thought, including me, when he started talking about saying things like I can grab somebody or I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nothing will happen to me, we thought that's enough to kill anybody politically. Well, guess what? It stayed down in that realm. That's where he knows how to fight. So we got to talk to people. We got to let them know we understand the problem. And that's why I talk so much about when I'm out campaigning with independents and Republicans and Democrats. That's why I do relatively well in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and those states we have to win, because where I come from. Doesn't mean you can't. Teddy Kennedy was able to get there. He didn't come from there. Rockefeller was able to do it. He didn't come from there. I don't mean you have to be from there to be able to do it. But you got to talk to people and what their concerns are. And think of it. I wonder how many of you had a conversation at the kitchen table this morning and said something like, well, who's going to tell her? I don't know. How are we going to do it? We don't have the money to send her back to school. We're not going to be able to pay next year. Or, you got to ride on those tires another 10,000 miles because we don't have the money this time of the month to be able to get new tires. They're practical things. But we act like people aren't having those conversations. My neighborhoods where I'm from, they're having that conversation. But we don't talk about it. And there's answers. There's firm answers. I'm going to give shorter answers.
You are standing in a historic place. You are standing where Abraham Lincoln once addressed a group of Exeter residents. And I believe that we are in a moment in American history where we need another Abraham Lincoln. We need someone who's going to heal our fellow citizens who are Hispanic, who are Black, who are Jewish, who are Christian, who are Muslim, who are gay, who have been attacked and hated for 4 years. I want to know, how are you going to communicate as President Biden with us? How are you going to communicate with the American people? Who are you going to put in your cabinet that will help us heal as a country?
Good, very great question. I don't propose to compare myself to Abraham Lincoln, although the Republican Party just said that they thought Trump was a better president than Lincoln. Did you see that poll? Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. But all kidding aside, look, that's what I mean by restoring the soul of the country. Number one, what I'm going to do is be who I've been my whole life. That's why I have such overwhelming, that's the president, he's playing that for me. That's why I've had such overwhelming support from the African American community, more than everybody else combined running for office. They say, how's that guy Biden that way? Because I come out, that's what got me involved in politics in the first place, the civil rights movement. I get overwhelming support because they know my heart. They know my heart. They know what I've done. That's why we're in a position where I spend so much time with the Latino and Hispanic community, and why there I get overwhelming support, because they know my heart. They know what I believe. because I really do, honest to God, believe all men are created equal. Not a joke. It's the essence of who we are. It is about what we say, what we do, but how we act. And thirdly, think about in terms of, you may remember I got in a lot of trouble because on Meet the Press, I told the president I didn't have to evolve at all. And if I ever got asked a direct question, I was going to answer it directly. I was raised by a dad who was an incredible man. My dad was a high school educated guy with the greatest regret he had. We didn't get to go to college. An extremely well-read guy, a gentleman. And my dad, I remember dropping me off when I wanted to be the only white employee in the east side of Wilmington. Our city is 53% black. My state has the 8th largest black population in America. And that's as a kid how I got involved. We moved from Scranton, where there were virtually no black folks, down to Delaware, and I saw what was happening. And so he dropped me off at the city hall to get an application to be a lifeguard in a place called Price's Run Swimming Pool on the east side in the projects, 99% African American. And I was getting out of the car. I was in my senior year in high school. He was dropping me down his way to work. And there were two men in Rodney Square, which is the corporate capital of the world. More corporations are incorporated in my state than anywhere else. At the time, the DuPont company was the 8th largest corporation in the world, and the Hercules Corporation, and these two men, well-dressed in suits, leaned over as I was getting out of the door at the corner where we stopped, and they kissed one another. And I turned and looked at my dad. You know what he said to me? He said, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other. It's simple." So when I was asked whether I supported gay marriage, I said, I see absolutely no distinction. It's about who you love. That's what it's about. And so remember the chaos it caused at the time. And Biden, what did he go on saying? And I went in the next morning because I met every morning, every Monday with the president early in the morning. And everybody says, boy, he's going to really be angry at Biden. He's messing up the campaign, et cetera. He got up from his desk, walked up to me, and this is public now, I can say it, and gave me a hug, and he said, "You told me, you warned me," and he said, "You're right." The question is, the American public has moved beyond the elected officials in this issue. I made a bet then that more than a majority of the American people believed it was okay. It should be entitled to the same exact rights anybody else would. So my generic point is, this, that I have a record. I've never hidden my views. And everybody knows it's one of the liabilities I have as well. No one ever doubts I mean what I say. I just sometimes say all that I mean. It gets me in trouble. But all kidding aside, it's about the country. It's about who we are as a nation. I mean, it really, truly is. And so I think it's a matter of... And the last thing I'll say in this, because it's important, presidents are supposed to be able to persuade, not just assert, persuade, make a case. So I get people, whether it's in Iowa or here or in Idaho, where I was not long ago, or Montana, wherever it is, and it's talking about immigration. And I said, let me point something out to you. 24 out of every 100 children in school today are Hispanic. Why are you spending so much time, Biden, talking about it? Because they are the future of this country, like when there are waves of Irish immigrants, waves of Italian immigrants, waves. They will assimilate. But it's overwhelming in everybody's interest that they be educated, that they in fact learn, that they become part of the community, that they in fact are engaged. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's the thing that makes it better for everybody. It's a reality. And so that's what I mean about persuading. Sometimes you can tell people their initial action is, whoa, why are you helping those folks? Because I'm helping you. The whole country's better off if, in fact, there is an assimilation of the same values. And these kids who are dreamers, they are already Americans, man. They're already Americans. I love when people talk about the dreamers. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You're 6 years old, mom says, we're crossing the border. Said, no, mom, leave me here. I know that's a violation of the law. Leave me here. Come on, for the Lord's sake. So anyway, I'm convinced that we still are the people we've always been in our gut. We've always gone through these periods that we've gone through where we have waves of immigration coming in. No, the last time a guy's become a friend of mine is John Meacham, who wrote The Soul of America, the book. And when I was doing my book about my son, he interviewed me before 4,000 people, and then he asked me to do him as well. And he talks about, he says, you know, hate never goes away. It just hides. It hides. And when it's given oxygen by leaders, because what presidents say matter, no matter who the president is, it matters. And he said, and the history of America is not a fairy tale. Anybody in here Catholic? Raise your hand. Well, guess what? Get Meacham's book. You can see in 1925, walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, 3,600, if my memory serves me correctly, people in pointed hats and hoods, Ku Klux Klan, marching against the idea that Christianity is going to be polluted by Catholics after World War II, coming from Eastern Europe. That's what's going to pollute us. And it took everybody to speak up. It took all clergy of all faiths. It took Republican presidents to speak out then. We almost were not able to pass mention not supporting the Ku Klux Klan. There were 7 senators, 36 members of the House in both parties who were open members of the Klan. But it's not who we are. And we stepped up. So we go through these waves. We go through these waves. We have the xenophobic folks who slow things up for anywhere from a couple years to a decade. But then we regain our footing. It's time to regain our footing.
Thank you so much. When I despair at the state of this country, I am reminded, and I remind my friends, we still live in the same country that voted for you along with Barack Obama twice. And that gives me hope. And my question is that we are living in a time of unprecedented lies, and how do we help the Democratic Party? How do we help you break through all the misinformation, and in particular when it comes to talking about the economy?
Thank you. Well, you know, first of all, if you think about, everybody asks me, why do I spend time going to states that the Democrats lost last time out? Why do I spend time going to rural, spending so much time in rural America? Why do I do that? Well, it's not just whether you can win those areas. Barack and I, when we lost rural America, we lost it 52-48 or 45-55. We didn't lose it 85-15. But that's what the losses were. So it not only matters whether or not you can go in every area and win it, but you go in and make your case and cut down or increase the number of people supporting you. That's part of it. That's part of it. And so I don't think the country has so fundamentally changed that, in fact, when Barack and I were running, we won all those states, and when we lost closely, which made the margins in the states a difference. Imagine what would have happened. There's 73,000 votes in 3 states. If those 173,000 votes were different, Hillary would not only have won by 3 million votes, which she did, because of Electoral College you didn't win, but we would have won not only by the margin, we would have won the states. We would have won Pennsylvania. We would have won Michigan, et cetera. And so there's a lot at stake, but again, it goes back to, we got to let people know we hear them. Even the part we don't want to hear. Let them also vent on us. Let them make their case why they don't think we're the right ones. But that's part of just listening. Just listening. And I'm talking to him. You got anybody back there? I'm sorry. Sure, okay.
Hi, my name is Stella Mock. So my parents were actually refugees from Vietnam, so I really appreciate everything you're saying about protecting minorities. So I have a question. So as we all know, Donald Trump, he's mean, he's a consistent liar, and will do anything to win, including getting help from foreign governments. Given this, how do you plan to counter all his attacks and defeat him in the general election?
Well, you know, I guess the quickest way to explain it, if you want me to go on and expand, then tell me. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Even his supporters have no illusions about who he is. Not a joke. I don't know many of his supporters say, I want my child to grow up just like Donald Trump, okay? They like either the fact that he is his tax cuts, well, whatever it is, there's things they like about him. We gotta let them know who we are. And in my case, we gotta let them know who I am. Because they don't know where the Democratic Party is now if you look at the polling data. We've got to let them know that we choose, for real, hope over fear. He's used fear as a weapon. We've got to make it clear that that's not what we're going to do. That we choose hope. We have believed in hope. Second thing we have to demonstrate is that we choose truth over lies. Everybody knows how we lie. But we got to demonstrate that we're not going to engage in the same kind of thing. The third thing we have to do, which is really important, we have to let them know we choose science over fiction. Science over fiction. And we really do choose unity over division. Because what's happened? What's happened? It's hard to resist the temptation when you are in office now, and I'm not, but when you're in office or you're running for office, to not engage in the same kind of personal attacks that the person attacks you with. If you notice, I haven't said a thing, and I'm not going to, about his family. You want to talk about being engaged in enterprises where you're self-serving, but guess what? Where I was raised, you don't go after somebody's kids. You don't go after it's them. You go after them. What did they do wrong? What do they are? So there's a whole lot of things that you, and the temptation sometimes, I have to admit to you. You know, I remember in Catholic grade school, the nuns would teach about the occasions of sin. Well, one of the occasions of sin is when he starts speaking to me. My tendency is to go, whoa, and I got to go, Joe, come back, you know, okay? But really and truly, we have to demonstrate what we're preaching. We have to treat people with dignity and decency. We got to make the process. So I don't know how to answer it beyond that. But I do think an essential part, and a lot of candidates I'm running with possess it, I think it gets down to a fundamental thing, authenticity. Is the person you're talking to being authentic with you? Are they authentic? And are they able to do or mean what they say they're going to do? And I think that's the most important thing right now. I could be wrong, but I'm not a pundit, so I'm just a candidate. Yes.
That's all the time we have. We can take questions on the rope
Okay,
line.
how about if I do yes, no, if you're just a couple, okay? And I got somebody in the back there who had their hand up. I can't. Yes, ma'am, the lady in the white. Can you give her a microphone?
If you are the nominee, as she suggested over there, you're going to have to pull out all the stops. Our 21-year-old son said the other night, I wonder if Joe Biden would consider choosing a Republican as a running mate.
The answer is I would, but I can't think of one now. No. Look here. No, I'm serious. No, here's what I mean. Let me explain that. You know, there's some really decent Republicans that are out there still. But here's the problem right now of the well-known ones. They've got to step up. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not being a wise guy, but there are a lot of people A lot of people. By the way, it's presumptuous of me. I'm going to get clobbered by the press. Biden's talking about vice presidential candidates who doesn't have the nomination, which is totally legitimate, okay? But there are an awful lot of people out there who are qualified to be, the only thing I know about is the qualifications for vice president. And by that I mean, no president can, by him or herself, handle the job all themselves any longer. It's too big. And so one of the things that I worked out with, we worked out, Barack and I, is that when he gave me responsibility, he gave me total presidential authority. I could hire people, I could fire people, I could pick anyone from administration to work with me. I had complete control, not a joke. And the reason he was confident in doing that is, first of all, nobody wondered whether or not he couldn't do it. That's because it's a hard thing for a person to give somebody significant responsibility, like doing the Recovery Act, for example. It's $900 billion, and then it pointed out that less than 0.2% fraud or waste occurred, and that person gets a lot of credit, in this case me. Well, it takes a president to be able to say, have the confidence that that's not going to diminish them in any way. And secondly, it requires you to be simpatico with your vice president. Not just like them, not just trust them, but make sure they're in the same exact wavelength politically. Barack and I used to disagree, and in private we'd argue with one another on tactic. He was the president. He got to make the call in every case. But one of the reasons he said he wanted me to be his vice president, when he said he never thought I'd walk into the White House and be intimidated by the White House. I'd always give him my honest opinion. But I only did it in private. In private. I wouldn't even, when I disagreed with him in the Situation Room, we spent thousands of hours down there, well over 1,000 hours down there, over 8 years. I would wait when I had a real disagreement with him. I would wait till we walked up to the Oval and talked to him alone, because we completely trusted one another. So whomever I would pick for vice president, and there's a lot of qualified women, there's a lot of qualified African Americans, there really truly are. There's a plethora of really qualified people. Whomever I would pick, were I fortunate enough to be your nominee, I'd pick someone who was simpatico with me, who knew what my priorities were, and knew what I wanted to do. We could disagree on tactic, but strategically we'd have to be on the exact same page. Because the next president has to be able to turn and say, Madam Vice President, get Detroit back on its feet. Madam Vice President, take care of the Recovery Act. Mr. Vice President, I want you to go out and make sure that deals with getting 156,000 troops out of Iraq. You do it. You have to know, walk away, because knowing that if there's any doubt about what the president wants, you will go to the president and say, Mr. President, here's what I'm thinking of, this is what I want to do. You follow me? So it has to be somebody who is simpatico. Last question, this young man, before he jumps off the stage. Why don't you holler?
Yeah, I think I can yell it. My name is Jeremy. I come from New Brunswick, Canada. And my question for you is, I'm wondering how how you're going to establish relationships with Canada, just very briefly, if you came in with Prime Minister Trudeau specifically.
The way I did before. I was vice president. He was the prime minister. I went up there and he held a state dinner for me, and he talked about how we got along because we worked on the same issues. Canada has a significant issue with indigenous people. They had that yearly conference that's called. I was the speaker invited. We work again on a lot of things together. We're worried about, and we're not now, we're worried about what happens as a consequence of climate change in the Arctic and Russian engagement in the Arctic claiming territory. There's a whole range of things that are overwhelmingly of our interest. Think about this. It's the only border that's over 5,000 miles that we don't guard. We don't have troops stationed on the border. Canada is our closest friend. And so, are you a citizen here now, or are you still in Canada? You live in Canada. Well, if I defect, that's where I'm going. By the way, all kidding aside, my deceased wife, my wife who was killed, her parents, her family's all from Toronto. They just moved across the lake and east to Auburn and Syracuse, New York. So, But by the way, And it's the same way, by the way, and I'll end with this, it's the same way what's going on in terms of Central America and Latin America. We've always talked about what we can do for Latin America, that they are our back door. They're our front door. They're the single, no, really, think about this. I made a speech that got a lot of coverage at the time, and we worked hard on it. There's no reason why the Western Hemisphere can't be from the northernmost part of Canada all the way down to the tip of Argentina. Democratic, middle class, free and open. But we have to be engaged. We have to be engaged. And that's why when I went down and made that speech and made the speech at the UN saying, it's not what we can do for you, it's what we can do with you. What we can do with you. That's why the president's decision on Cuba opened up a door for us to be able to get people off the hook in the rest of the region to be able to work with us in a more coherent way. That's why we got so much going on initially till he stepped in and changed it all on trade, Pacific trade. From the Pacific, meaning we're Pacific power, but that includes the Pacific nations of South America, North America, as well as nations in Asia. And so there's a lot we can do, but we have to reach out. And my concluding comment is, you owe him big for sitting here. How old are you, honey? You're 11 years old. Talk to me before we leave, okay? And thank you. What's your name? This is like, Harris, this is like going to a real long church service here. And you're a really good boy, and you got caught in the front pew. So thank you all very much for having me here. I'm going to stick around and take questions, okay? I'll stay here and answer some questions.
Hi, I'm Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, and I'm joined with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, as well as Rabbi A. Freeman and Pastor Guilford Monroes. Congressman Jeffries and I have been talking over the last few hours, and really as two African-American men that have historically represented the Jewish population in the borough. Brooklyn is the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. We represented this borough both in the Assembly and the State Senate, and now as the borough president and as Congressman Jeffries as a congressional leader here in the city. It is clear to me when you look at the cases, at the heart of the cases that we are seeing across the city, the numbers speak for themselves. Since, as of last Thursday, there were 183 anti-Semitic hate crimes in the city of New York, a 22% increase from last year. And really the number is even more impactful because it's almost a 39% since 2016. Hate crimes are increasing, but clearly the Jewish community is receiving the brunt of these attacks. And people have often stated, well, is it simply zeroing in on the Hasidic community? I say no to that. I say the Hasidic community is representative of Judaism, and I believe people are not only attacking the individuals, but they're attacking the symbol. And as a person of color that knows the history of being targeted, If I was a Jewish resident of this city right now, I too would be alarmed. It is alarming what we're seeing. Some of the assaults, some of the rocks thrown at buildings, the swastikas, what we saw in Muncie, what we saw in New Jersey. The combination of these attacks are giving a real chilling effect to the community at large, from Williamsburg to Borough Park to Crown Heights to Muncie to Union City. It is sending the same message that hate has become pervasive in our city and in the tri-state area, and we want to do all that's possible to stop it. Hate is a virus, and it will continue to spread at a rapid pace if we don't address it at its heart and at its source. It was alarming to me as I sat down on a train the other day speaking with a group of young people, and I showed them a swastika, and many of them didn't know the significance of that swastika. When you see a young person draw a symbol on the wall that brings so much pain and is not clear on what that symbol represents, it's a clear indicator that we are failing to educate them on a grassroots level, and most importantly, I believe we are failing to communicate on a grassroots level. We live side by side, we go to the same schools and even the same places of employment, but the reality is that we live in insulated communities, in insulated environments where we're not communicating with each other and what I believe in a real way. And that is why we're here today to talk about how do we get at the heart and soul of this matter. I believe the Attorney General was right. We need to speak to young people about the dangers of hate mongers online, the same way we tell them to watch out to sexual predators. That is what the Attorney General stated in New Jersey, and I also agree with that in his op-ed. 4 years ago, we held what was called Google Hangouts, where we had young people from across the city, across the borough, speak to each other using technology. I found that in our school system, in our yeshivas, in our private schools, young people were talking to young people across the globe, but they did not know people across the borough. When we visit schools such as Sunset Park and in Brownsville, you had young people who have not interacted with anyone outside of their ethnic group. That's alarming and that's troubling. And if you are not communicating with each other, you will never really understand each other. We announced several months ago an initiative that we're doing with the ADL on doing a No Place for Hate social program in our schools. The ADL doubled down on their funding. We also allocated funding. We thought it was important. This is providing a real curriculum for children between the ages in pre-K to 12-year-old, organizing structural instructions inside a classroom environment to teach young people how to look at bullying and also in other forms of hate that really have become pervasive in our school. Today we're announcing something that I think is important. We're announcing an initiative that is going to call for 100 dinners across the city. These dinners are going to start off here in Brooklyn with a table of 10 people that would sit at the table. These dinners, we're giving it the name, the title, Breaking Bread and Building Bonds. The goal is to have each 10 person at the table come from a different ethnic group. So one table will have a person from Haiti, a person that's of Jewish faith, Sikh, Pakistani, Yemen, all different groups coming together, sitting around a table and sharing cultures, sharing understanding, explaining what is a kufi, what is a hijab, what is a yarmulke, what are different foods, what are some of the historical pains that the communities have gone through, what are some of the cultural issues that impact the community, and then there will be a follow-up. After the dinner, they will go and visit each other's environment. They would visit the Schomburg Center in Harlem. They would visit a mosque, a synagogue, a Sikh temple. They will learn from each other and in the process become ambassadors to talk about on the ground what is happening and how we must live together. Now, what's unique from this conversation, it is not going to consist of the traditional people who have been in the room. We have been talking to each other. Eric Adams and Rabbi Potasnik, we do not need to sit in the room and talk about how do we live together as one. It is our everyday group of young people, our college students, our high school students, our middle school students. We want them to make up the 1,000 individuals who will sit at the 100 tables and start really turning around this conversation of how we live together and how we will continue to grow together as one city. People often state that fighting hate is a one-way approach of stronger laws or ensuring that people remain incarcerated. No, there is an immediate need of proper law enforcement and proper laws on the books to identify those who are carrying out hate crimes. But then we need a long-term plan of how do we start healing this city. If we don't address what is at the core of this violence, which I believe is the lack of communication, the lack of respect, the lack of understanding, not appreciating our intersectionality, that we are all together in this fight. Those who are experiencing displacement, those who are experiencing lack of education, those who are experiencing homelessness, hunger, trouble, and pain, we are all of the same group, and we all experience it the same way. It is through the spirit of intersectionality that we are bringing people to the table. And this is not just a feel-good conversation. It is a do-good way of bringing people from different walks of life into the same room and engage in a face-to-face conversation. At the heart of the violence we are witnessing and the increase of hate crimes in the city, particularly in the Jewish community, but in general throughout the entire city, is the failure to appreciate, communicate, and acknowledge our coexistence. And the congressman and I want to go to the heart of that problem and ensure that we start the process of resolving that. I want to now call Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I want to thank my good friend, Borough President Eric Adams, for his tremendous leadership as we move forward with this incredibly important initiative, breaking bread and building bonds, to ensure that brother is talking to brother, sister is talking to sister, community member is talking to community member in the context of our great borough, our great city, and of course our great country. Here in Brooklyn, we understand that our diversity is a strength. It's not a weakness. We are a nation and a community and a city and a borough of immigrants. Some voluntary, others involuntary. But as Dr. King once observed, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And that is at the heart of what this initiative is all about. Dr. King once recognized, in the midst of the church bombings and Bull Connor and barking bloodthirsty dogs and billy clubs, that hate never extinguishes hate, that darkness can't extinguish darkness, only light can extinguish darkness. And so we want to move forward and bring people together in an intimate, authentic, community-based fashion. We want to turn pain into progress, We want to turn this crisis into cooperation. We want to turn any hatred that may exist into hope for a better future for each and every single community. That is what breaking bread and building bonds is all about. I represent the 8th Congressional District in the United States Congress, one of the most diverse districts in the country. I represent the 9th most African American district in America, the 16th most Jewish. And some of my colleagues down in Washington will often ask the question, is that a complicated thing? I say, no, it's not complicated. It's the best of both worlds. And there's a common history that exists, in particular between the African American and the Jewish community, that we want to build upon at this moment of crisis. We're committed to making sure that in our community, in our borough, in our city, we will defeat anti-Semitism, we will defeat racism, we will defeat hatred. We will succeed in bringing everyone together. We've done it before. We've been there for each other before. We're going to be there for each other during this moment of crisis. Let me now yield back to my good friend, Eric Adams.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. And again, our goal as we pondered this, both the Congressman and I, we have young men, children who are growing up in this city. And the instructions we give them at home about the institutional and historical relationships that our country has had, and many groups, particularly the African American and Jewish community, those instructions are not done across the tables and in the living rooms. As I stated, we are a diverse borough and city, but we live and we exist in silos. And it's troubling when you think about it. We go home to our insulated communities, and our goal is to use the table to have different groups from all over the city sit down and learn from each other. We want to address this issue not from the limb, but from the roots. And by doing that, we'll ensure that the city or the harvest that we have in the future will address that. We want to ask who has joined us, District Leader Davis. No one knows the experience of violence more than District Leader Davis. His brother, former police officer and city councilman, was struck and killed in the city council chamber by a bullet. He understands the pain of losing a family member, and we want to ask him at this time to, before we open the floor for questions.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Borough President, longtime friend, Congressman, Borough President. We've been on a proactive mission in Crown Heights since the Crown Heights riots. My family, my brother, myself, the Borough President, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and others, to prevent these type of acts. In the last 2 years, I've been campaigning for a curriculum, conflict resolution curriculum in our public schools with a concentration on multiculturalism to be included in the curriculum, conflict resolution to be included in the curriculum with a concentration on multiculturalism. Since then, I've been in front of close to 2,000 young people from pre-K to high school, myself and Rabbi Eli Cohen, my neighbor in Crown Heights, speaking to children. This to be in the curriculum, I created a children's book to be able to speak to the children called Love Yourself, Love Each Other. A wonderful children's book to teach as early as we can the importance of interacting, the importance of multiculturalism, as early as we possibly can. I also been on a campaign to create the Crown Heights Cultural Hub, something that I call the Crown Heights Cultural Hub. In Crown Heights, you have the Brooklyn Children's Museum, the first of its kind. You have the Jewish Children's Museum. Carlos Azama started the Carnival, the West Indian Day Carnival on Eastern Parkway. And then my home, we call it the James E. Davis Multicultural Museum of Peace. This is all in a 4 or 5 block radius from one another. These institutions are in a 5 block radius from one another. You can go to the Jewish Children's Museum and learn about the Jewish culture, the historic Jewish culture. You can go down to Carlos Lazama, Clackey home, and learn about the history of the Caribbean culture, the carnival, and how that began. You can go down to the Brooklyn Children's Museum. This is all in 4 block radius, and learn from the first of its kind Brooklyn Children's Museum. And then you could come down to the James E. Davis Multicultural Museum of Peace and learn about the peace movement and the efforts that we've taken with the groundbreaking of the Bedford Union Armory, with the children's book, with the film, and so much more. You can learn about the history right there. That's the Crown Heights Cultural Hub. These are things that can be instituted as we continue to go forward. So I spoke to Rabbi Eli Cohen, and he said he's on board with all of this, and he says, thank you, Borough President Adams. Thank you, Pastor Noble, Gil. He said, thank you, Congressman, and thank you. Thank you to everyone a part of this, and thank you to the media. But it breaks my heart when somebody gets hurt over hate, over jealousy, because I'm an experienced, my family member, over jealousy and hate. It breaks my heart for Muncie, what took place in Jersey City, and all across the nation. It breaks my heart. But rather than just sitting and moaning and crying, we take an active role to get involved and to engage with solution-oriented messages, with a solution-oriented conversation to do something about this, to make change. So I've dedicated my life to that. I stand with these fine young men who have dedicated their life to that. We've known each other for over 25 some odd years. I stand with these fine young men in grief sometimes, in the morning, in pain, but I stand with them because we got to continue to fight on. It doesn't just hurt the victim, but the families suffer, an entire community suffers, victims of violence suffer, and we suffer all across the board. Everyone suffers from these type of acts, but we addressed Juve, the violence surrounding Juve, and it worked. Myself and Assemblyman Walter Mosley. And it worked. We can address this aggressively and get this done. And we're committed to doing that. Let's talk about hate together. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. As a grandson from a Holocaust survivor, I remember when I was a little child at the Hanukkah holiday, my grandfather told me stories about Nazi Germany. Who would ever imagine 25 years later, I'll have to explain to my little 11-year-old why people hate. As I lightened the menorah last night, I didn't have the answers for my son when he was asking me, Daddy, what's going on? Why do people hate us? What is happening? As a community leader, first, I'm extremely thankful for the borough president and the congressman for their leading role in speaking out when the community hurts. Like the borough president always says, if someone hates against one, it hates against all. As you saw in the church yesterday, I just wanted to say how my heart breaks when I visited the family of the Farns family in Jersey City just last week. A 7-year-old girl is still asking me, when is my mom coming home? When is my mom coming home? And I didn't have the answers. And now the community is grieving and mourning still in Jersey City, now dealing with another tragedy in Muncie, New York. We all have to come together. This is a 9/11 in our community. We can't continue like this. We're a community of love and peace. We want to live close to our neighbors. Like the district leader says, we're just one community, one family, and we're asking and we're encouraging everybody to live together in peace and love and harmony. And I thank again the Congressman and the Borough President for the amazing leadership. Thank you so much.
We're open to any questions at this time, if there are any. Yes, sir. No, I don't. I believe that we have one of the best police departments in the country, if not on the globe. I believe our hate crime unit is doing an amazing job, the apprehensions, and I think we need to continue to support and make sure they have the resources. I understand the concern that the electeds have raised in their community, and I respect that. But I believe that having a military force without the proper training can actually exacerbate the problem and not assist the problem. We're not going to be able to police ourselves out of this problem. It's going to take a combination of smart laws, smart law enforcement tactics, but we have to go to the root of the problem, and that root lies in our inability to communicate, respect, and understand each other. There's going to be a series of meetings. We have been communicating with organizations both in the Jewish community, the African American community, and other communities. Tomorrow I'm going to be attending a meeting with some of the Sephardi community. We're starting to put together the groups. We want to have young people be the table leaders. So we need 100 young people that are going to be the table leaders. We want to make sure we partner with mediation centers so that we can have trained facilitators to speak and encourage people to speak. And so we're looking to start it out within the next 2 months. So we're going to roll out with the first series of dinners. It's a Herculean task, 100 dinners throughout this entire borough and city. We know it's a huge task. But stopping racism and stopping anti-Semitism is a Herculean task, and we believe it's going to start with bringing people who have historically have not spoken to each other, bringing them in the room and allowing them to do so. One moment.
Let me just add to that. We know that the model works because, as Jeffrey Davis indicated, it's borne a lot of fruit and yielded a lot of success in Crown Heights in the aftermath of great turmoil in terms of the disturbances that took place in the early 90s. Crown Heights is not perfect, but it's a lot better off than it was during the height of the conflict, so the model can work. It's my expectation, in partnership with Borough President Adams, that one of the first dinners will take place in the southern part of the borough along the Coney Island Peninsula, which has both a large concentration, in fact, one of the largest concentrations of public housing in the city of New York that I'm privileged to represent, with tremendous people who are dealing with some tough issues, as well as the largest concentration of Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants in the world living in the Brighton Beach, Coney Island Peninsula area. And it's my expectation that that will be one of the first places to start, though, as the borough president indicated, we expect that this will be a citywide initiative. Well, it's a moment that requires leadership at every single level, and I certainly think that we're hopeful that we'll see moral leadership coming from every single office, and certainly the highest office in the land, moving forward. Congressional delegation will be speaking on this issue a little further later on in the week. But I will say that we have worked as hard as we can as a delegation to try to secure additional funding, both to deal with incidents of domestic violence, or should I say domestic terrorism, as well as funding to allow houses of worship and synagogues and shuls and yeshivas and churches to secure the funding necessary in an increasingly volatile environment. So in the midst of the tragedy, we're still expressing our condolences and support for those who are grieving in Jersey City, those who are dealing with the trauma of the attack in Muncie. So I think all of us should put politics aside, and hopefully the President of the United States will do that as well. Well, we've been dealing at the leadership level, and I'm not sure what the status is of the conversations between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi at this point. He certainly spends a lot of time tweeting about her. I do think that, again, leadership is required at this moment, and hopefully we'll see that from the President of the United States.
You want me to Yes, no, this was born out of a meeting we held here, I believe 2-3 weeks ago, where we had a round table of people, and as we went around the room, I was surprised to see even some in the room were harboring some feelings, and it was clear that some of our views were not rooted in reality. And when I spoke with Pastor Monroe, who holds our faith unit here, we talked about how do we get people in the room, and this was part of that. And the Muncie issue and what happened in Jersey City just really expedited. We need to get this done. We need to start speaking. And at the heart of it, as I stated, when you have young people drawing swastikas and not knowing the meaning of swastikas, that's a clear indicator that we are not communicating the history of our relationships as well as the pain of what these symbols represent. Yes.
Do you think there's significance to the fact that two of the suspects in anti-Semitism attacks here in Brooklyn were let out without bail?
Yeah, I think that there has been a great deal of bail reform. I have been an advocate for bail reform, particularly in nonviolent crimes. I'm concerned about when someone strikes a police officer, as we saw one incident, and I'm concerned when you do certain crimes that really strikes at the core of public safety. I think we should reflect on that. The Muncie case was no way connected to bail reform, so I want to be clear on that. But I am concerned that when someone commits an intentional action of harming someone because of their lifestyle, their ethnicity, or their religious belief, that we should take it as a very serious strike against how we want our city to be.
So you think bail reform should be changed then to include?
No, I think it's up to the state legislators to look at this. They pass the laws. They should look at these incidents, and they need to make the deliberate review over how they want to move forward. That is outside my span of control. I think the city and state legislators need to look at this. There was so much misgivings historically around bails and misapplications of bail. And I think that may have caused people to look at it a certain way. If I was in Albany, I would be bringing that conversation up, but I'm not. I'm here in the borough of Brooklyn. It's going to be, we as in the borough president's office, we're going to identify a nonprofit, and we're going to allocate $10,000 as seed money. And I have received communication from several of the private entities that stated that they want to participate in funding the dinners. I am excited that some of the pre-existing relationships that we've had in this borough, as the congressman stated, this is an extremely diverse borough. Any given day, we can be in a Sikh temple, in a mosque, a synagogue, and we have received a number of calls that I made yesterday and asked, can we have people contribute to this, because it's a Herculean task. We're talking about anywhere in the area of $100,000, and we believe we're going to find the funding from private sources, but we're going to start it off here in Borough Hall with a $10,000 seed grant.
Eric, you're talking about at the beginning, 1,000 people in a borough of millions. You really think this can happen?
Yes, without a doubt. There's something powerful about the term ambassador. There are millions of people across the globe, but we send an individual to a country to represent the energy and spirit of America. I believe our young people will be the ambassadors that we need to really tear down these walls of isolationism that we live in. You will be surprised how many people in this city don't interact with different ethnic groups or different cultural groups or different groups of different religious beliefs. And I think you get 1,000 people to start going back into their schools, going back into their shuls, going back into their churches, and start really teaching people on the ground of what it is to wear simple things, like I said, a hijab, a yarmulke, a kufi, what it is to go to the Schomburg, the Jewish Children's Museum, what it is to go to Richmond Hill, with one of our largest Sikh communities. Young people in Brownsville, they have never been in a Sikh temple. Young people that are in yeshivas in Borough Park, they have never visited a Baptist center. We can't continue to go down this path where we are not learning from each other. It is only going to foster a greater level of hate among a numerical minority. And I think those 1,000 people are going to be the ambassadors of how we live together. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
What a great group. Why am I surprised that you all showed up in the middle of a blizzard? So thank you so much for doing that. We've had a wonderful time here. Thank you so much, Susan, for that nice introduction. And I also got to meet out there with two great representatives. Representative Linda, where is she? Massimola? I said that right? Good. I have a little trouble with my last name too, so don't worry about it. As well as Jerry Stringham, who I've gotten to know. Where are you, Jerry? Right over there. Thanks for being there. He's sitting next to, you note that in New Hampshire so many people are elected that I introduce the electeds before my own husband. And this is John, my husband, right back here. And are there any, and also Charlie, where are you, the Democratic chair? Thank you so much for being here for the county. And then I want to see, are there any other electeds out here that want to introduce themselves, or where you want to? Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, very good. Oh, good. Welcome. Thank you. So you came over from Vermont? Yeah, just for this. I'm kidding. Okay, very good. And then I want to thank Leah, our organizer here. Where are you? She's in the back. Okay, she's somewhere. And then mention to you that we are actually doing a series of town halls all over New Hampshire. We're doing 7 going into the New Year, snow or no snow. And we've already been in Dover, and in Wolfboro, and in Conway. And then we were, let's see, what do we have to go? Oh, we were in Gorham. And then we're going to Claremont and Keene. Not tonight. We're going to be around here. But it is really great to be in this town. My husband and I and our daughter spent actually Easter weekend around here. We came here, if anyone remembers Easter weekend, there was a big rainstorm. But we came here and we were at Schilling's at lunch. We went to the candy counter, of course, saw the mill, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful town. And then we've come back, done the parade. Scott Merrick is our state director here was a rep in Lancaster, from Lancaster area, and worked for Jean Shaheen, as did Chuck. Where's Chuck, who works there now? Scott always calls Chuck the mayor of the North Country. So anyway, but it's good to have you here as well. So we are having a really big moment in our campaign. I got an auto-corrected text from one of my friends, and she said congratulations on your insurgency. And I think she meant surge. A lot of that, but we'll call it either way is fine with me. A lot of that has to do with the debates, and the last debate in particular, but really a number of them that have given me the chance for people to get to know me. I know I'm not as well known as the vice president or some of the people that have run for president before from certain states. And so this is really my opportunity for people to get to know me. And I think what they see is this: someone who has passed over 100 bills since I got to the U.S. Senate as the lead Democrat, in the mold of your two incredible senators, in Maggie and Jeannie, two good friends of mine. Representing people means improving their lives. It means going to Washington and actually getting things done. And I know that might seem maybe even naive in today's politics, where everything's about Twitter and the loudest voice in the room. But as I said on one of those debates, I don't think people are necessarily looking for the loudest voice in the room. We already have that in the White House right now. I think what they're looking for is someone who is going to tell you the truth and look you in the eye, and actually have people's back and bring back a sense of decency to the United States government. I think it was the columnist David Brooks who said when Barack and Michelle Obama left the White House, "You don't know what you got till it's gone." And I think that's a good place to start today, because I think you all know, watching the debate, that people see this, a lot of people in the country, as an economic check, of course. While there is all this economic news out there, we all know, especially in the North Country, that not everyone is sharing in that prosperity. There's a lot of people that are still having trouble paying for their mortgages, but even if they can do that, they don't quite know how they're going to make the college bills, and they don't really know how they're going to pay for prescription drugs. There are long-term issues with our economy and our country, everything from the fact that this president hasn't dealt with climate change and has set us backwards when it comes to climate change, hasn't made those big infrastructure investments that he promised that he made. I mean, I swear to God, it was easier to get cell phone service and high-speed internet for our family when we went to Iceland than northern New Hampshire. I promise. And they have volcanoes there. And this is something we can actually solve our country, but not with this president. And I will get through some ideas for our economy. We know how important that is, but I don't want us to forget something else about this election, that it is more than an economic check. It is also a values check. It is a decency check. It is a patriotism check. It is about a president that, when asked at the G20 about Russia invading our election, stood there and made a joke about it to Vladimir Putin, despite the fact that his own intelligence people have said repeatedly that maybe Russia didn't use missiles or they didn't use tanks, but they used a cyber attack and they invaded our election all the same. Think about this. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives on the battlefield protecting democracy, standing up for democracies. Thousands of people in this patriotic state have done that. 4 little girls lost their life at the height of the civil rights movement in that church in Alabama, because simply some people wanted to be a part of that democracy and other people wanted to push them out of it. So many of our battles in this country, our election battles, our actual battles, have been about democracy. And this president turns to a dictator when asked about it and makes a joke about it. That's why for so many people, this is even beyond being just about the economy. It really is. I think about this rancher in northern Minnesota, and this was my first glimmer of this. He had taken me on a tour of his cattle ranch on an ATV with these really big cows, and I literally thought to myself, this is just a bad way to die for me. We're like trying to avoid running right into them. And then at the end, everyone leaves. We go into his house. The other ranchers left. The media leaves. And he looks at me and says, we voted for Donald Trump. And I said, do you mean your family? You mean the other ranchers? He said, no, I don't like to talk about myself, so instead of I say we. And he said, we voted for him because we were mad about health care. And he said, but then we saw him standing in front of the wall. And I said, well, he didn't really build that wall. He's saying it. He said, no. It was the day after the inauguration. It was the CIA wall. And he remembers, which I do as well, when Donald Trump gave this highly partisan speech in front of a sacred wall to those that have served in our intelligence agencies. And it's a wall of all the stars of the anonymous agents who have died in the line of duty. And he went in front of that wall and gave a speech about his crowd size and about partisan things. And this guy said he couldn't believe it. And I felt that same way. Just when you think, well, maybe he'll do this or that, you see him give his speech and you just think, no. Then he said, a while after that, he said the Boy Scout speech. He said that he was a Boy Scout and that when he saw him making a political speech in front of, I know that what I did, that wasn't patriotic. It was for the wrong reasons. A tear goes down his face. Or the guy in New Hampshire when I was in Conway a few months ago in the middle of the nor'easter. And there was a line of people and they all had these kind of happy stickers on that said, I am a climate change voter. I'm a Supreme Court voter. And this guy comes up and he just has this brown jacket on. And he shakes my hand and I say to him, well, you don't have a sticker on, sir. And he leans over and he says, that's because I was a Trump voter. And these are my neighbors and they don't know. So, don't say anything about it. He said, I tell you this, I'm not going to do it again. So that is what we are talking about here. And it is not just my stories. We saw it in Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell, as of last month, now has a Democratic governor. We saw it in Louisiana, where they re-elected a Democratic governor. Those are really red states. So that means that those are fired up Democrats, yeah, but they are being joined by independents and moderate Republicans who are basically saying, you know what, there is something bigger than anything, and that is our country. And by the way, footnote on history, the other thing those two states have in common is the night before those elections, someone went and visited those elections to campaign for their opponents, Donald Trump. So my question is, where can we send him next? Because that happened in those two states. But when you think about it, and this is what I want us to not forget here, there is just something bigger going on. And we forget that at our own risk. And we better not screw this up. Because for some people, they may not agree with our candidates. And as you know, our candidates don't all agree with each other on certain things about the economy and what we should do and what we should do about health care and things like that. And they don't cross every T and dot every I. But what they do, what they do agree with, that I think everyone in this room would agree with, is that our country is better than that guy in the White House. That our country has a bigger heart than that guy in the White House. And that is what brings us together. Because what I want to do is I do not want to eke by a victory at 4 in the morning. I wouldn't be running for this because that's not me. I want to win big. And to win big, you have to build this incredible coalition of people. And you've done it here before in elections. You have these independent voters in New Hampshire. And if you think we don't have them in Minnesota, 3 words for you: Governor Jesse Ventura. That would be my state. So I understand this in a big way. And I have won those voters in a big, big way. And I have won moderate Republicans. In fact, I've won every congressional district in the state of Minnesota every single time, including Michelle Bachmann's district 3 times. And I have not done it by selling out. I have done it by going to communities like this in the middle of a snowstorm and showing up. I have done it by going to that cattle ranch, by talking to our rural communities about what we are going to do if their hospital is going to close down, or how we're going to keep their child care going and figure out some way with getting by with Band-Aids with a series of grants. And I just know that we can do better than that. So as we go into these impeachment proceedings, which I know people have been following, I will be one of 100 jurors. It might mean I can't be here, so you better be nice to my husband if he comes back. Show up, like he's a really nice guy. But it also means that I have a constitutional duty. And that's part of America. And in my mind, I just look at it this way. We have a president who put his own private interests, his own partisan interests in front of the interests of our country. And he claims he should be exonerated, then why won't he let just 4 witnesses come and testify? Richard Nixon let his top people come and testify. Why won't he let Mick Mulvaney as acting chief of staff, who's the one that held back the aid after Donald Trump made that call, or the guy that actually sent the email telling them to hold back the aid, Mr. Duffy, come and testify? That's what this debate is right now in Washington, D.C. about this impeachment hearing. But I'm here today because you guys are jurors in a different way. You're about 100 jurors, I think. You have a much bigger task, and that is to figure out how we're going to win this election and what candidate is best to lead this ticket. So let me make this case to you. These issues are so important for our country. They are bigger than even the things we're talking about on the debate stage. They're literally the future of our democracy. And so I ask you to have an open mind to putting someone on top of that ticket that maybe isn't the most well-known, but has the actual history of winning and bringing people with her, and winning every time she does, flipping the state legislature, because I get the importance of not just going to where it's comfortable, but going where it's uncomfortable. You also have to decide on ideas and what's best for our economy and what brings people along with us. So we have a guy in the White House right now, and this is how I look at this. And I think sometimes when we talk about him as a bully, that's true, he is one big bully. But I think we miss something when we do that. We miss how some of the people in Pennsylvania that voted for him, the carpenters I met with, Wisconsin, the dairy farmers I met with, the dock workers in Michigan, all those 3 states went to Donald Trump, in addition to Ohio and Iowa, and so close Minnesota, which is why he comes back to my state over and over and over again, even though I will beat him by 17 points. Those people in those states, the way they think about this, when they really start to question Donald Trump, some of them may have stayed home, Democrats who stayed home, some of them may be independent, some of them voted for him. The way they think about it is, you know, he keeps gloating about this economy, but they're having to take an extra job, or they can't afford childcare. And then when you really start talking to them, they think about this. So they got us out of this downturn. Small businesses in this town got us out of this downturn. People had to be really resilient, especially in the tourism business. So they're resilient. They get us out of the downturn. He comes in the White House, has the best job in the world, lives in the best house. And what does he do? He gloats about the work that they did. And then when things go wrong, when the challenges start breaking through, when you see infrastructure and levees breaking down because he hasn't done anything about climate change or infrastructure, when you see the cost of insulin skyrocketing because he hasn't done anything about pharma, when you see the effects of his trade war on everyday workers, what does he do when that happens? What does a whiner do? He starts blaming people. He blames the head of the Federal Reserve. That's one of his favorite targets. That makes me laugh. I mean, he appointed him, and the guy's just trying to do his job. Okay, he blames Barack Obama. That's another interesting one. He blames the city of Baltimore. He blames the entire country of Denmark. Who does that? That's what he does. He goes to a NATO conference, and when some world leaders are caught on tape laughing at him, I have a different take than some of our colleagues on this. I have heard senators make fun of other senators in worse ways than that. Even senators they like. They're always saying, where is he? He's doing a press conference. I must have heard that about 50 times. Okay, well, what the question is, when that gets out, what does he do? It's not that they did it. It's what does he do? He is so thin-skinned, he quits. He's not there for the end of the conference. He doesn't laugh it off. No, he quits. And America doesn't quit. So when I talk to these people in these states, I don't call him a bully. I call him a whiner. And we do not need a whiner in the White House, because I think that best characterizes how he deals with adversity. I've been reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on leadership, and she goes through some of our great presidents, and she talks about how they had so much different backgrounds and when they rose in power and how they did it, but one of the things that they have in common is how resilient they are, if they're able to handle adversity in their own lives and how they handle adversity when they are handed it in the form of challenges and things, whether it is international or domestic with our country. It's how can you handle and are you resilient? And this guy is the opposite. So what are the challenges he should be dealing with, which is really gets to our own optimistic economic agenda? Because one of the things we know we need to do after what happened in 2016 is not be distracted by everything he does, because that's what he does. He's a master of that. Optimistic economic agenda. Number one, we can make healthcare more affordable, and we can make rural healthcare work, because as you know, it's not one size fits all. That's why we have critical access hospitals. I've been working hard actually with Senator Grassley to extend that, even to have a different classification for emergency room hospitals, so we make sure that there's health care for everyone in rural areas. Number two, build on the Affordable Care Act. And for anyone that wants to completely blow it up, remember, when you get to a river in either of our states, the best way to cross it is by building a bridge, not by blowing one up. And also remember, practically and politically, that the Affordable Care Act is now 10 points more popular than the President of the United States. So let's be real about this. And if you're real about this and keeping in place those protections that he's trying to tear down on keeping people on their insurance when they have pre-existing conditions, if you're real about this, then you see, well, how can we make it better? Number one way, a nonprofit public option. This is exactly what President Obama, and I supported this, wanted to do from the beginning. It'll bring the cost of premiums down. It'll be a smart way to get more people covered. Number two, taking on pharmaceutical prices. In Minnesota, we can see Canada from our porch. And interestingly enough, on a vote to bring in safe drugs from Canada, it was a Klobuchar Sanders amendment. Bernie and I, about 2 years ago, got 14 Republican senators to vote for it. It was the middle of the night, but they voted for it. And then Grassley and I ended up doing a bill together to do that. One of the great things I found out in this presidential campaign, after we did a lot of research, is this one thing that a president can do herself. You don't even need Congress. You can apply for a waiver. Talk about leverage over the pharmaceutical companies that hasn't been used. And so that is one thing. Secondly, the ban that's written in law that says Medicare can't negotiate better prices. That's written into law right now because they were able to lobby to get this done. You can literally take that off the books. You have to pass a bill to do it, and you unleash the power of 43 million seniors to negotiate better prices. They have banned you from doing that, anyone that's on Medicare. That's how it works. It's outrageous. You can put a cap on the prices of drugs. That's a bill in the House right now, $350 billion it would save for taxpayers in just 10 years. So those are things. Talk about building on the Affordable Care Act, unfinished business right there. Nearly 20% of our health care costs. Doing something about long-term care. It's the elephant in the room. It wouldn't even fit in this room. We're seeing a doubling of our senior population. No one's talking about it because everyone's relitigating the Affordable Care Act. One, keep Social Security strong. That's actually one of the most easiest, straightforward things you can do. Right now, the payroll cap is at $133,000 where you pay taxes in. You could do a donut hole up to $250,000 where you don't pay in, and then have it start again. It would keep it solvent. Otherwise, you're going to see 10 to 15% less payout by 2034. Secondly, keep Medicare strong. That's obvious. Third, do something about long-term care. So my dad, he is in assisted living. I've told his story in the context of addiction, and one of the reasons I came out so strong with a plan on opioid addiction and making sure that we also are doing more on mental health and alcoholism, and have a president that will really take this on. But his story now is that he is in assisted living. He's 91, he's sober, the AA group still visits him, and in his words, it's hard to get a drink around here anyway. And he is in really good spirits. Well, I know exactly when his long-term care insurance that he smartly bought when he was a newspaper columnist, when that ends. And I know when his savings would hit in, which aren't that much because of his 3 marriages, which is a whole nother story. And so then I know when Medicaid hits in, like so many families. And I know that I'll have to move him, and I got Catholic Charities to agree to take him in, which is great. But that's what I'll have to do because Medicaid they don't take Medicaid where he is staying right now, where he's really happy in a small house. And so that's where we are. And for many families, they don't even have that long-term care insurance. So my plan is to make it easier to get long-term care insurance with premium help so people can plan ahead. And then just make it easier to afford long-term care. And that is, how do you pay for that? I came up with a really good idea. A really wealthy person in Boston gave me this idea. Thank you. I mean, willingly gave me the idea. And that is that a lot of times people who are wealthy set up trust funds for their kids. That's fine, allowed under law. If you just started at trust funds that are over $500,000, you don't, yes, you don't tax them, but you can tax the gain, the appreciation, what they gain on them at some normal rate, like the capital gains rate, personal rate. If you do that, you bring in over $100 billion that you could use to help people to afford long-term care. And that's not some crazy pie in the sky idea. I think it's really important to be concrete and show how we're going to pay for things. But that is exactly what I'm talking about when we can be innovative and bring people along. I think most people in America would completely sign on to that agreement, except maybe the people with the trust funds that are over $500,000. So those are challenges that are ahead. Having a fair tax code to pay for things is a challenge. One of our best arguments on Donald Trump is that Republican tax bill, where after it passed, he went down to Mar-a-Lago, which he had over $1 trillion in debt to your shoulders. And then he went down to Mar-a-Lago. Was anyone there for that? I just didn't want to embarrass someone, I don't know, friends from Vermont or any, I don't know who was there. I somehow think that like no one from this whole town was there, but he said, and this is documented to his friends, you just got a lot richer. That's what he said. You just got a lot richer. That's going to be a big, big fact to use. Let me tell you that. You just got a lot richer. That's what he said. That was the intention of that bill. So if we rolled back the regressive parts of it, used part of that corporate tax rate, $400 billion, that's 4 points of it only. It went down from the mid-30s all the way to 21%. If you bring it up to 25, that gives you $400 billion to spend on infrastructure and on our broadband and the things that we want to do for this area. The new governor of Michigan, by the way, a woman, Gretchen Whitmer, ran on the slogan, fix the damn roads, okay, and she won. So you have that. You could do another $100 billion to help on things like childcare. You could do, this is my plan, $200 billion for a fund to start paying down the deficit. To start actually, thank you, one person. Where are you? Oh, the Vermont. Least likely. Oh, Vermont. Wow. Okay. Anyway, you can do that. I promise I'm not going to make fun of our Vermont friends anymore. I'm going to stop doing it. Wait. You can do that, and these are decisions we have to make as a community and a country. But there are things that we can do, and he has done the wrong thing. Okay, other challenges. The challenge of education and making sure that we are connecting the jobs that are out there, the jobs we want to fill, with our education system. Not just looking at it as a bumper sticker, free college, right? And my plan doesn't yet fit on a bumper sticker, so maybe you can help me. But the plan is to invest the money where we want to and we need to, and that's for people that can't afford college. That means doubling the Pell Grants, getting up with the times and how much things cost, from $6,000 to $12,000 a year. Enormous help for families, and they can use that at public or private schools, and then increasing the income level that you can qualify for up to $100,000. But the key thing here is to look at, okay, what these jobs are. And this is why I favor the 1- and 2-year degrees being free. Fastest growing area of job openings. Manchester Community College, I visited there. The president said something like 20% of their students had 4-year degrees. Think about it. And then they go get a 2-year degree so that they can pay for their doing. Why is that? Well, we are not going to have a shortage of MBAs in this country. We have a shortage of plumbers right now. We're going to have over 1 million openings for home health care workers. Those jobs don't pay as well, and so we got to make sure. That's why all this stuff I'm talking about, child care, retirement, is necessary, so that people can go into those jobs and they're able to live on those jobs without getting food stamps, or they're not going to want to go into those jobs, and we need them to go into those jobs. That's where I'd rather put the money instead of sending rich kids to college. I mean, they should go to college, but not at our expense. So over 1 million openings for that. Over 100,000 openings for nursing assistants that we can't fill right now in the United States of America over the next 10 years. We're going to have over 70,000 openings for electricians, and those jobs pay well. We just have to make sure that we keep creating incentives for people to go into the areas where we know we're going to have job openings, and then respecting the dignity of work for those jobs. I think that is a much smarter way to think about our education system so it works with our economy as a whole. Immigration reform is really the same thing, to start seeing it as an economic issue. We don't have enough workers right now in the Midwest in our fields. We don't have enough workers in our factories. We don't have enough workers in rural areas, in hospitals and in nursing homes. Yet we have a number of immigrants that have those skills. We have immigrants that start small businesses all the time. We have people that came over here actually legally in temporary status that are sitting there not knowing if Donald Trump's going to deport them the next day. So my answer is comprehensive immigration reform. We passed it in 2013 with Democratic and Republican support in the Senate. We passed it with the support of the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce and the Farmers Union and the Farm Bureau and the migrant groups. What stopped us? It froze in the freezer of John Boehner next to the frozen peas because everyone else wanted to get it done. Well, he's not there anymore, and the House is in other hands right now. And so it is time to get that done because immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. Next, climate change. And you're certainly seeing this. We see the change in the North Country. We see the change in some of our weather, but we also see the change in some of our animal population. What's happening with moose across, I know that's happening in my state. We see it with the oyster business off the coast of Maine, and we see it with the rising sea levels. We see it in Florida, we see it in the wildfires in California, and you see it in the middle of the country with the unprecedented floods and the inability many of our farmers to either harvest or plant crops. And you certainly see it, here's a novel argument people don't make enough, in the 50% increase in homeowners insurance across this country, with more to come if we aren't smart and do something about it. That's why on day one as president, I would sign us back into the International Climate Change Agreement. There were only 2 countries not in it when Donald Trump took us out. That would be Nicaragua and Syria. They are now in the agreement. We are the only ones. The next day, bring back the clean power standards. A lot of companies are already going to meet them. I get the small electric co-ops. I have a huge amount of them in my state, and I've worked with them on how we can do this as well and make it work for everyone. Third, the gas mileage standards. The car companies were ready to meet them to begin with. and then the president pulled them back. California tried to move ahead with them. Ford Motor Company still wanted to move ahead, the Ford Motor Company. And then the president threatened them with antitrust violations for even trying to do what they wanted to do from a business perspective with California. These are true stories. You can Google them. All of this happened. So we can bring back the gas mileage standards. We can do sweeping legislation to put a price on carbon. There's many ways to do it. We have to make sure that the dividends that come back go right back to the people, especially in cold weather states, to help them to afford their energy, to make sure that people are kept whole. We can do that while at the same time creating incentives for new jobs. This is, for me, not just a thing from books. It is from the heart. My relatives from northern Minnesota, we would drive up there, and for a while outside of Duluth, they had a sign that said, "Last one to leave, turn off the lights." And that was because the iron ore mines where my grandpa worked were closing down, then they open up. Right now, thanks to the work we did on steel dumping, they have opened up again. But they went through some tough times. And then they did some smart stuff. Tourism, that's why I chair the Tourism Caucus. Tourism, infrastructure investment, bringing in some good new small businesses, doing some other things, and they're thriving there right now, under 22 inches of snow, but they're thriving. But what I take to heart from my experience growing up and my grandpa losing his job when the mines closed down is how you have to always reinvest, and you have to make sure if government does things that change people's lives, that you find a way to bring in other businesses to where they are. And I will be devoted to that. And I tell that part of climate change because I think it's one of the big reasons we haven't been able to move forward, because in this room we most likely believe in science. By the way, my favorite march of all the marches that have happened since Trump got in was the March for Science. And my favorite sign was this: what do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. Yeah. Are you scientists? Are you kidding me? Who are you? Where? Oh, very good. Okay. Like we're at a revival meeting here. Did anyone else hold funny signs in the thing? Who wants to speak? You did? Okay, well, very good. Anyway, so that is about science, and that's about believing in science. So these are all challenges. I think I'll leave the rest for questions, but some of the big challenges we'll see. But I really end where I started, and that is that this is about our democracy. And a good story to end with, since my husband is here, a holiday story. And when we went to church on Christmas Eve with our daughter, and she's now 24, I remembered sitting in that very same church, very near where we were sitting in this pew with her when she was 4 years old, and at that same day, and she was to play the angel in the nativity story, and she was at the practice, the rehearsal, and she was wearing these big white drooping wings and sitting with me, and she would not go out there to practice. And I said to her, why won't you go out there? And she said, I want to be the donkey. And I go, no. Timmy and Joey, these hot teenage boys, I go, they're the donkey. You can't be the donkey. She goes, well, I want to be Mary. And I said, no, Mary is 14. You can't be Mary. I said, I don't understand. You have the coolest part in this whole thing. You get to go at the end and spread your big wings. And she finally looks up to the top of the church. She goes, Mom, I don't know how to tell them. I don't know how to fly. And I said to her that day, you know what, honey? Not all angels fly. And you are truly, on this blizzardy day, the guardian angels of our democracy. You are giving people the wings to fly who don't even know who you are right now by making sure that we bring back some dignity and decency, and we bring back the future to our country. And so I want to thank you for being willing to do that. I would love for you to just put on those wings and sign one of those commit to vote cards for us, because ours is truly a grassroots effort. We knew, and Scott knew when he signed up with me, that we were going to make this work, but I'm not sure everyone else believed it. We knew when I picked that color green for our buttons that we did it for a good reason, because that is the color to me of grassroots politics. Politics that's divorced from big money, but politics that understands that it's about people. For me, it's the color of Paul Wellstone, who was one of my mentors, and some of you don't know him. He sadly died way too young. He was the U.S. Senator from Minnesota. He was in a plane crash with his wife right before the election, and that year was a big year. It was the year that he took a very, very brave vote, courageous vote, the right vote against the Iraq War, the only one in a tough state that took that vote right before the election. It was a year that he told our state that he had MS and that he was in a lot of pain, and his whole image had been one of running really, really, really fast. And he couldn't do that anymore. In fact, his ads when he ran against a really wealthy guy who was an incumbent, when no one thought he could win, he talked really, really fast for 30 seconds and said, I don't have nearly as much money, so I'm going to say things really fast. That was his theme. And he went on just unbelievably so to win and to actually win re-election as well. So now we come up to this election. I have no opponent. Sounds really nice. In my re-election for county attorney, so I campaigned with him a lot that year. And what I saw was this. He was in that green bus that we have all over the place. We can't bring it here because of the windy roads, but we will try at some point. He would campaign in that bus, and whereas he used to run in the parades, at the very end he could only stand on the back of the bus in the parades and wave next to Sheila. But here was the cool part. He had so many people that he energized in these green shirts running around that bus that you didn't even notice he wasn't running himself. That is what grassroots politics are about. That is really what our democracy has been about from the very beginning. So I'm asking you to join us with our green buttons and our green shirts that you can order online, and join us in our campaign. We'd love to have your support. Thank you. We got okay. Here we go. We got some questions from people. Let's see. Okay. Christopher, is there someone else from Vermont? St. Johnsbury. Oh, there you go. Okay, right there. You've been kind of keeping your heads down through this little tormenting of your fellow citizens. Okay. Oh, this is, okay. How likely do you think it is that Mitch McConnell will allow witnesses at the impeachment trial? I love this. No one's ever done this on a question. And thank you for your service. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so I sort of addressed that a little, as you know. I don't know. It doesn't look good right now, but you never know. I was buoyed by the fact that Lisa Murkowski, another legislator from the North, as in the independent-minded Republican U.S. Senator from the state of Alaska, spoke out and said that she thought this thing had to be fair, and she didn't agree with some of the things that McConnell was saying that just happened a few days ago. As you know, Mitt Romney has also, over the last few months, really questioned the president's conduct. And so I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to have to decide. But in the end, we're going to keep making our case based on the law. I think that this is a state that gets that. You had the first state constitution in the country. You understand that the president is not king, that in America the law is king. That's the very reason that our country was founded. And I really think about this as the easiest way, I think, is like a global Watergate. That in Watergate, you had a paranoid president facing election who wanted to get dirt on a political opponent. So what did he do? He, through his henchmen, hired some thugs who went in and broke in to the Democratic headquarters and rifled through papers and file cabinets looking for dirt on a political opponent. In this case, the president himself called a leader of a fledgling democracy, which I visited, by the way, at one of the last trips John McCain took. He invited me and Lindsay to go with him to Ukraine. And we also went to Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and were able to see firsthand the threat those countries are under every single day from Russia. And that was the very reason McCain planned that trip, because it was right after Donald Trump had gotten elected, right before the inauguration, and right at this time period. This is where we were. We spent New Year's Eve in Ukraine on the front line with widows who had lost their husbands to Russian sniper fire. And he made that point, McCain did, because he wanted to show those countries that we stood by their democracies, that we stood with them. And so in this case, what does this president do? He calls the head of this fledgling democracy a new guy, and he basically says he wants a favor. And then lo and behold, 90 minutes later, we now know this as of 2 weeks ago, one of the head guys who worked for Mick Mulvaney then sends the email, says hold back the $400 million, hold back the aid, and this is closely held, so, you know, keep it quiet, basically. Seriously? So we don't even know what this guy was told because Trump won't allow him to testify. So that is really what's at stake here. And again, as I said at the beginning, I think it's really important to see this as part of a larger story, regardless of what happens with impeachment, as you explain it to people that you know, especially independents and people that are not as involved in this, that this is really part of the same pattern where he puts his own interests in front of the interests of our country. And he does it all over and over again all the time. Most strikingly, when he was trying to invite the international leaders to his resort in Florida. I make you a promise right now, I will not invite international leaders to one of my resorts. Okay, I don't own a resort, but that's it. Okay, let's see. What is your greatest accomplishment? Okay, well, that's funny. All right, well, I guess having our daughter, that was pretty good. No one's actually asked it quite like that. Thanks, John. And actually, when she was born, she was really, really sick. We didn't expect it. She couldn't swallow. She ended up being fed from a tube for 1.5 years. And out of that actually came a lot of my interest in politics. When she was born, it was supposed to be all perfect. It wasn't. And back then they had a rule that you could only stay in the hospital for 24 hours no matter what was going wrong, the insurance companies. So she was in intensive care. They thought she either had a tumor or some kind of a genetic disease. And I had been up all night, no sleep. They're throwing all these things at me about what I had to do. And they kicked me out of the hospital. And as he's wheeling me out, while this whole thing is going on, I still have the moment to have a political thought in my head, and I looked up at him and I go, this would never happen to the wife of the head of the insurance company. And so when she got a little bit better but was still sick, I joined forces with some people. I went to the legislature, started looking into it, and went and testified several times against or in favor of a new law guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. And I learned 2 things from that experience. One, at the time, the legislature was almost all men in the committees. And when you start talking about things like embarrassing for them, like episiotomies, you could literally get them to pass the New Deal. Like, you're like, okay, whatever you say. Okay, so I learned that. And then the second thing, and I wasn't in elected office, I was a lawyer in the private sector. And so the second thing that I learned is when you go to the conference committee, and there were lobbyists that they couldn't say they were against it, but because the 2 bills were different, but they wanted to delay it for a really long time. So I brought 6 pregnant friends to the conference committee, so they outnumbered the lobbyists 2 to 1, and when the legislators said, when should this take effect? The lobbyists wanted like a year, the normal time was August 1st, and my friends were like this, raise their hand and go, now. And that's what they did. They had it take effect the day the governor signed it. So it was a great thing. So that was my lesson from all of that. So that was a pretty cool early way to start in politics. And then when I got to the Senate, I've worked on a lot of big things like getting the election security money, including for this state, infrastructure money, doing a lot of work, passing over 100 bills on things like broadband and drug shortages. That was a big bill that I got done. But still, probably my fondest memory was of a littler bill, and that was I got a call one day from a Republican congressman from my state, Jim Ramstad, and he said, this little girl's in the hospital, and we could have prevented this, honestly, in Washington. I was only been in the Senate for like a year and a half. He said she sat on a pool drain at a pool in the suburbs. Her intestines got sucked out. And this is happening all over the place. And he said there's a bill that was named after James Baker's, the former Secretary of State's Republican granddaughter, Virginia Graham Baker. Have since met her family and her dad. She was killed with this. And there were numerous kids killed from this. Every year this was going on. So I looked into it and realized that it had just stalled out in the Senate and for years and years and years. And so I went to Ted Stevens from Alaska, who was the Commerce Committee chair, and brand new senator, told him about the story. And I still remember what he said. He goes, well, we don't have a lot of swimming pools in Alaska, kids, so I'll help you out. And I used to be a lifeguard, so I actually care about this. And he actually helped me make it stronger so that it wasn't just future pools, it covered past ones. And except for a few exceptions, very few, it was just a different kind of drain that cost like less than $100. But you put these rules in place for it, and then it passed. And I still remember calling that dad, big Republican family, and they just so believed I was going to get this done. I remember every week he'd call me, I'm working on it. I thought, how am I going to get, because it was, passing things is always hard in the Senate, but we got it attached with Trent Lott's help to a bigger bill, and we got it done. And so I got to call him from the cloakroom and tell him it got passed. By that time, their daughter had died after 16 surgeries, and I got to meet her several times in the hospital. And the amazing part about it was just 2 years ago, the head of the Consumer Product Safety Commission testified in front of the Commerce Committee, and he said since that bill passed, not one child has died from that. So there's a story. Okay, let's see. I think we talked about climate, so I do that one. Let me see if I can get some. Let's see, here we go. Brian. Let's see. How will you unify the Democratic Party at the end of the primary season? Well, there's a good question. I have worked really hard on that stage. I'm going to make policy differences. I obviously differ from Bernie on a number of things. We came into the Senate together. We get along. We're both in leadership, and I differ from Elizabeth on some things. I am the senator on that stage and have been since the beginning that did not get on the Medicare for All bill. On page 8, it said that 149 million Americans would lose their current health insurance. I didn't think that was a good idea. I don't agree with them on free college for all, and I think I've explained that. But I think what I have tried to do is make it on the issues, not personal. I think it's really important to be clear in your views and not be a wimp when you don't agree. I've done that my whole life. I am, someone who is blunt. I think that is a really good thing because you've got to be blunt and tough to be able to take on Donald Trump. But at the same time, I have repeatedly said, more than anyone else on the debate stage and throughout time, that what unifies our party is bigger than what divides us. And the fact that I actually serve in leadership, there's just a few of us with Elizabeth and Bernie, I think is a really positive thing. I was the one on the debate stage when I was critical of Pete's experience because I think we want to have someone that's actually won in a statewide race and been able to show that they don't just talk about it, but win with rural voters and suburban voters. I argued it by commending the experience of some of my colleagues that were up on that stage. And I think that that's going to go a long way toward uniting our party. And for anyone that is, I don't blame people for being worried about it when we've had these vitriolic debates, but I don't think there's been all vitriolic. There have been some moments of humor. Thank you. And there have also been some good times and meaningful times on that stage. But I think people's worry about it is legitimate coming out of 2016. I get it. But then I ask you to look at 2018. And in that year, all those people that voted for Bernie, they voted big time. And they voted sometimes for much more moderate candidates than probably they would have liked to see in House races. They did. They did. Some people in this room probably did that. And they did that because they knew that it was the right thing to do. And they did that in places like Orange County in California, where they flipped 7 congressional House seats. They did that in Iowa, where they elected 2 brand new women to the House. They did that in Wisconsin. If you don't believe me, I have 4 words for you: former Governor Scott Walker. And they did that, as I mentioned, in Michigan. They elected a Democratic governor in Kansas, Laura Kelly. One of the interesting things about these stories is that these people might not be household words to you, like Abby Finkenauer in Iowa, but she's not. And that is because people elected candidates, or Sidney Axney. They elected people that they thought reflected their states or the districts. And they elected people that they liked, that weren't celebrities, that they thought could actually bring people with them. And so I think that's how we unify our party. We unify our party, obviously, around the fact that we want a different president than Donald Trump. That is pretty obvious. But we unify our party around ideas, knowing there's going to be some differences, but we know that there's really a lot of commonality on climate change. Bernie's proposal is a bit different, I will say, with the money, but everyone else, it's pretty much around where Jay Inslee was. It's not that far apart. There's a lot of unity on things like pharma. There's a lot of unity when it comes to immigration reform. So I see it that way. I've always seen it that way, and I know and have worked with nearly everyone up on that stage. So I am not as negative on that as some people. I know we can do this, but we just have to have the right candidate. Okay, all right, let's see. All right, it's sort of the same one, but the divisiveness, so maybe I'll do that one. And then gun violence. And then maybe I'll just end a little with democracy. But on the gun violence front, so Minnesota, like New Hampshire, is a proud hunting state. So I have a little different perspective, not in terms of my views on the solutions, but my views when I talk about it. So I look at these proposals like background checks, limitations on magazines, and my first reaction is, does that hurt my Uncle Dick in his deer stand? They do not. And one of the incredible sea changes we've seen in our politics in the last 2 years is that even after Sandy Hook, we couldn't pass those bills, even with those parents in our office, in my office, where I had to tell them we didn't have those votes for universal background checks. Even with that going on, we could not pass those bills. But what was the sea change? Parkland. When those kids stood up in Florida, something amazing happened. Kids across the country saw them, and they thought, you know what? Just like they did with gay marriage, wait a minute. They talked to their dads and their grandpas in hunting families. They'd say, you know, why can't we do this? This won't hurt hunting. This won't hurt Uncle Dick in his deer stand. And those kids voted in record numbers in the midterms, which made a huge difference in those House races. But then a lot of their own parents and grandparents started looking at it. That's why it is no surprise now that you see a majority of Trump voters want to see universal background checks. A majority of hunters want to see universal background checks. So the only reason that we haven't gotten done is because after Parkland, when I sat across the President of the United States in that room, and I wrote down 9 times when he said he wanted to see universal background checks with hashtags, I still have the piece of paper, because he met with the NRA the next day and he folded. That's what happened. And the other only reason we don't do it is that these sensible bills, background checks, closing the Charleston loophole to allow police to have the time to vet gun owners, and the third one, when someone wants to go out and buy a gun for the first time, the third one, my bill. It's been sitting around there for a long time to close the boyfriend loopholes. It says that convicted domestic abusers shouldn't be able to go out and get AK-47s. Those 3 bills have passed the House, including with some Republican support. They are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, and he won't let them come up for a vote. That is exactly what happened. So I really end with where I began. If you care about democracy and making it easier for people to vote, and allowing for same-day registration like you have in New Hampshire, like we have in Minnesota, and passing a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, which would make such a big difference in this state and in our country, we cannot just win by a little or lose. We have to win big. We have to send Mitch McConnell packing. And to do that, you have to win, not just with Doug Jones, who I just talked to this morning because his dad died, and he's an incredible guy down there in Alabama who won that race. Not just there, but we have to pick up these seats around the country, and you know where they are. We have to pick up these seats, and we can. Look at in Colorado. We're already way ahead with Governor Hickenlooper. We can win these seats, but only if we have a candidate that believes this is not just a personal victory, it is a national victory, that believes that we need a big tent and a wide coalition and long coattails, and I want to be your candidate. Thank you. All right. Good. So, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay. You can sign these cards. Okay, what are we going to do here? We're going to do some pictures. Okay, very good. I love our staff here. We were all together last night for a fun dinner at the Muddy Moose in Conway. That was a lot of fun. Okay, should we do these right up here? Okay. Well, we can...